Typically, defense companies in the United States selling into Europe, most of the time they sell through the government, through Uncle Sam. Weapon systems, things that you fight with, military communication systems, security items that, say, a police force might use, any of these sorts of things that operate to, as the military would say, deliver effects. Those things are all completely exempt from the majority of CE marking. What typically happens though is it's very rare to just sell military equipment absolutely flat. You might be selling something like ammunition, which is completely exempt. But when you're selling complex systems, they typically require repair, and it's frequently common that you would have to supply, as part of the deal, equipment to do repairs. And then sometimes with the really big programs, you end up doing what they call offsets, which is where the recipient country over in Europe is actually going to set up perhaps a joint venture with the US prime, and they're going to then manufacture elements of the product. Now, when you get into that sort of business, you're going to have workers over in those third countries to manufacture the product. And they're covered by all the national protections that exist over in those countries. And everywhere in Europe, if you're putting equipment onto the European market for workers to use or for consumers to use, then that equipment will need to be CE marked. And so you as a US prime, or as a US manufacturer of a particular product, it's your responsibility before you export it to Europe, it's your responsibility to CE mark it. So you're going to need people who understand what CE marking is about and who are also able to actually work with US defense equipment. However, CE marking, you're on the hook for 10 years once your product hits the European market. The company itself who produced this thing is on the hook for a full 10 years. We need to make sure that all those competing requirements are met. We need to deliver on time, we need to deliver to budget, if not below budget, and we need to make sure it's actually done properly. And this is exactly what we do. We help US manufacturers produce plants, set up production lines, set up factories in Europe to then manufacture products that have been highly successful in the United States, and they now want to sell that product on the European market. Engage with CE at the earliest possible point in your project. I've seen projects where we've got towards the end of the project, and because we weren't involved in the very, very original scoping, we've had manufacturers have to knock down walls in their factories and rebuild bits of buildings because they weren't suitable. And that could have been avoided by a simple review right at the beginning. We inspect and understand what your project is, what you're trying to achieve. We set about understanding what the equipment involved is, because CE is about equipment. So we look at what tools you're going to be providing, what you're going to be sending over to Europe, what maintenance, repair, manufacturing equipment you're going to be sending over there. We work out with you a plan to assess that equipment, to provide you findings on it, for you to determine what you're going to do about those findings, and then at the end of the day, you get our assurance that we will stand by you for the full 10 years of your CE exposure once that equipment is actually in service or on the market.